That was always like my thing whenever I was over there helping with something. He would go be doing something and I would take it as like a personal challenge to get farther than I think he would expect me to on whatever task he had given me. And aside from the actual welding, there's one specific moment I can put my finger on where something went off in my head and it was never the same again. So I thought I'd follow up the Cooper video with another one that's similar. This one probably should have been first, and that's Jeff Lutz Jr. Because without him, I would for sure not be doing any of the stuff that I do right now for one huge reason, and that is he taught me how to weld. He put the torch in my hand for the first time, and I didn't even really want to do it. Like, I was not seeking that out. I just, I'd come home from class one day, he texted me, he's like, hey, can you help me come by the shop and help me push a car? Because he was there by himself a lot when his dad was out, you know, filming whatever. It's just him. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go down there, I'm gonna push a car. I like didn't really know him that well at the time. I'll get into how I actually met him in a little bit, but just this specific story, I'll finish it out. I got there, helped him push the car, I was talking to him a little bit about what he was doing. It was like a 4th gen Camaro with a 540 and twin 88s, and he was making a fuel cell for it. And he's like, yeah, I just made this fuel cell. You know, I'm gonna weld it up tomorrow, whatever. He's like, you ever TIG welded before? I'm like, no, I've never welded anything before, really. He's like, you wanna try it? And I said, yeah, I wanna try it. So he's like, all right, and he gets these pieces of scrap, puts them on the table, gives me a helmet, takes the helmet, and he says, all right, just watch what I do. So, you know, I put the thing on and I'm watching him, and he lights it up, melts 2 pieces, and just, you know, starts putting the rod in. Like, until then I was not familiar with the concept of TIG welding. I didn't know how it worked. Honestly, it kind of scared me. Like, the thought of welding in general just looked like it was a good way to hurt yourself. So I was kind of afraid to do it, if I'm being completely honest. But when I actually watched him do it, that was the first time I'd ever watched somebody weld and saw what was happening. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. It's kind of like soldering. He said, okay, here, now you do it. So I take it, and he said, light it up, and I'll tell you when to put the rod in. Don't do it too soon or it won't work. I said, okay. So I lit it up, and I sat there for a while, and it starts to, you know, it was aluminum. I started on aluminum, just because that's what he was doing. That's what he grabbed a piece of. And it's doing its thing. The arc's kind of, you know, it's breaking up, starting to get shiny, and it gets shiny. He's like, all right, put the rod in. So I did it, moved forward a little bit. He's like, you know, waiting for it to go, and he's like, all right, rod, and he was kind of like telling me when to do it. And I did it, you know, like a little 4-inch piece. I still have the piece. I kept it and I labeled it so I didn't forget when I did it. I stopped and was like, oh, that's cool. And he said, dude, you need to buy a welder. What do you mean? He's like, you can freaking weld. You need to go get a TIG welder. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, people don't just do that. They don't just pick it up and do that like you just did. You need to go get one of those things like right now. And I was like, okay. Like, I don't know. I just did it. I like watched him do it and it made sense. And I did it. Like, the machine was already set up for the right amps and everything. So it was just a, you know, monkey see, monkey do thing in my head. I didn't think anything of it. And at the time, that was when the Escalade I had first done the LSA, and it did not have an ice tank. I wanted to do one eventually. And he's like, go to Horwitz and get some aluminum tomorrow, and I'll help you make an ice tank for that thing. It'll be easy. And I was like, okay, what's Horwitz? He said, oh, that's the metal place, you know, in Butler. You know, tell him you want this thickness and, you know, this big. So, like, the next day I went down to the shop, and he helped me measure it all out. Took the measurements that he told me to use, went down there, got the stuff, brought it back, and I was like, okay, now what? And he built most of it. Like, I helped him do it, but he did all the, you know, like the measuring. It went right here, and he kind of put it all together. Like, he's like, okay, now we're gonna cut the hole, and, you know, he showed me how he did that and all that stuff. And I helped him mark it and bend it, but he actually did the bending of it so it would line up right. And he got it tagged up, handed it to me with the welder, and said, here, put it together. And then he got a phone call from his dad or something. I think it was his dad. So he left the area, and I'm just there with this welder. All I had done prior to that was just that little 4-inch piece. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna poke this button and do it. And I did the bottom first. So if the top was, kind of figured out, then do the top last once I got my groove. And it just started going together the same way that the other piece did. I'm like, heck yeah, like I can do this. And I remember thinking, he was on the phone and I thought, I'm gonna get this all together before he gets off the phone. He would think that was cool because he probably doesn't think I'm gonna be able to do it. That was always like my thing whenever I was over there helping with something. He would go be doing something and I would take it as like a personal challenge to get farther than I think he would expect me to on whatever task he had given me. And that was one of them. And I did it. I welded it up. And he welded the feet on because that was a little bit of a different, it wasn't a corner joint, so I wasn't prepared for that. But we put it in, put water in it, it did not leak. I thought, man, like, this is really cool. Like, I need to get one of these things. I can weld stuff. This opens so many doors. And it was then that it kind of clicked, like, I could build my own turbo kit. Because I'd go over there sometimes and I'd help him, he'd be like making headers or something and I'd hold it while he tacked it. And I'd always put the helmet on so I could watch him. I'd just go over there just to watch him. I'd sweep the floor, and whenever it came time for him to make something, I'd run over there and just watch what he was doing because I wanted to learn more about it. So that's the actual story of how I learned to weld. But we'll jump back to how I met him in the first place. It was through a guy named George Messer, who had a Silverado work truck with a ladder rack, and it was turbo. I met him in a test and tune in 2015 when the Escalade still had a converter. I wanted to do a cam in it. And here's this guy with this truck who's going pretty fast. I mean, relatively. It was running like low 13s at the time. And that's kind of like, it was right in my wheelhouse. And I started talking to him about it. He was a cool guy. And he's like, yeah, this winter I just want to do a cam and then that's it. It'll be done. I was like, oh, well, let me know when you do that. Like, I want to help because I want to learn how to cam an LS motor. That was my goal. I wanted to learn how to do it from somebody who knew how to do it so I didn't screw it up. Because I screwed up my big block enough times by not just kind of winging it with some of my friends who were also winging it. This guy, he's got this turbo truck, it's working. I want to learn. So I put that out there. And I didn't hear from him for a couple months. And then he sends me a message on Facebook because I had offered to like come do the cam up at my garage because then he has a place to do it because he said he did all his work outside. And he's like, hey, I think if it's still on the table, I'd take you up on that offer to do my cam in your garage. So I was like, heck yeah, dude, bring it out. So he did. He had kind of like a junkyard, whatever was laying around, turbo setup on there that was built like, kind of roadkill style, just like, oh, let's see what we can put together with this random stuff. And it worked. And Jeff Jr. was the one who built it. I didn't know this. And one day we're gonna pull the motor out of this truck to put a different one in because it, snowball. And I was cool with it because I was learning so much. And he, Jeff shows up. I'd never met him before. I'd met his dad a couple years before that because he had dynoed my car, but I never met Junior. And he helped us pull this motor out. And he's like, I never knew what was here, I drive by here every day on my way to work. I always see the lights on, but like I had no idea. I was like, oh, that's cool. It turns out he lived like 2 miles down the road. And so he helped us pull this motor out, and we get to do, every now and then he would just stop by when the lights were on because he knew I was in there and he was going back from work. And we were messing with something, and he'd be like, oh, well, you could, make this panel and bead roll that. And I'm like, well, what's this? What's that? And he'd always say, oh, well, I could show you how to do that. I could show you how to do that. And I feel like he probably said that to a lot of people, and nobody ever actually called him on it. Like, hey, I want to learn how to do that. What do I need to do that right now? Because I want to figure it out. But I did. If he offered to teach me something, I was like, okay, let's do it. I think that's kind of how that dynamic happened. I don't know why. He was always willing to teach people things, and I was really eager to learn stuff. Somebody asked me before, and it was a good question. So was he a good teacher? Were you a good learner? How does that work? I think it's both. I think you need to have both to really create that, because he would teach me things that I didn't even ask to learn. Like when I'd be over there helping him with something, he'd be doing something. He'd be like, hey, here's how you do this. And I didn't know what he was doing, but I would stop what I was, sweeping or taking out the garbage or something. And I'd watch him do it, and he'd explain it unprompted. I did not ask. And it also kind of explained like 16 other things at the same time. And I was just like, this is great. Like, I'm learning so much. I'm going to absorb all of this. I was just a sponge when I was in there all the time. And so, yeah, he pushed me to get the welder. And when I got that welder, took it back to my own garage, I could like freaking barely figure out how to use it. I'm like, I was, all pumped, like, yeah, I can freaking weld. And then I get mine and it's like blowing out and doing all kinds of weird stuff. And then I realized a lot of the part of welding is the setup of the welder and that configuration. So I just kept messing with it until I figured it out. And then I was able to continue learning the motions once I learned how to use the machine. And it helped that I got one that didn't have a whole lot of settings to mess with. That's a note you should take too, if you want to get into it. Fancy welders are kind of confusing to a newbie. We'll fast forward. I did, a bunch of stuff with them. Like the first time I went to SEMA was with them. ERI, the first time I went to Oklahoma was with them. The first time I ever towed a vehicle on a trailer was his truck on a trailer behind his dad's dually. And the second time I ever towed a trailer was his dad's dually with a 48-foot gooseneck that had Pro Mod and the second 57 in it. I had never towed anything more than his truck on the open trail the first time. And he was going to Texas or something. I'm like, yeah, I'll go. So it was just me and him. He drives for like 4 hours. He's like, all right, it's your turn. And now it's dark. I can't see anything. His trailer's longer than anything I've ever seen in my life when I look at it in the mirror, and I'm just like, oh God. It's not just an empty trailer. Like, there's important stuff in here. It was very, throw me into the fire. And now I do that all the time. That was the first time I'd ever done it. Those guys really brought me out of like the local bubble. That's how I was exposed to the world and really shown what was possible, I guess, with this kind of stuff. And aside from the actual welding, there's one specific moment I can put my finger on where something went off in my head and it was never the same again. I don't even know if he'd remember this, because it was just such an in-passing thing. And it's weird how that works, where someone can say something to you just kind of in passing, and it just triggers something and you never forget it. And it's in there all the time. And it was this. Before I did the supercharger on the Escalade, I was considering turboing my Monte Carlo instead, the big block. At least that's what he wanted me to do. Because I had money saved up and I wanted to do something with it that was cool. And he's like, yeah, you could put a couple 88s in that 502, it'd make 1500 real easy. And at the time, I thought 700 horsepower was like freaking God. And I'm thinking, 1500, like, geez, what am I gonna do with that? I remember this, we're standing in their shop, looking at some car, and I was like, 1500, like, I don't need that, I don't do this for a living. And we were like walking out of the shop with like a camshaft or something, I think, for this George guy's truck. And just in passing, we're walking out, and I was like, yeah, I don't do this for a living. And he just said, he does, and pointed at his dad's Pro Mod in the corner. And I don't know why that memory is as vivid can be in my head, because I looked at that car and the light bulb went off. And I thought, you're right, he does. Huh. Nothing was the same after that. It wasn't at that specific moment that I decided that's what I wanted to pursue for a living, but it made me look at things differently, way differently. It's really significant, all of that, because I learned so much that they probably don't even realize that I learned just by watching them. Like, sometimes they would be talking to me and I wouldn't even notice. I'd be like off in space or something, and I'd be like staring at a car, or like, yo, you there? And I'm, oh, what? I was like staring at this car, just kind of piecing it together in my head, thinking about what I've seen them do and how this car is, and trying to picture how they did it. For example, a piece of pipe, I'd say, oh, that piece of pipe looks like this. I think they probably cut it like that and then did this to it, because I saw them do that once. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I would think about when I'm walking around in there looking at all these cars. But something that comes to mind, why it was important for me to be around that and to see it and how impactful that was, is there's a specific song lyric that comes to mind that I actually heard for the first time when I went to tow those cars to Texas with Jeff Jr. And he probably doesn't remember this either. But you know, when someone else is playing music and you hear a good song, you pull out your Shazam thing, figure out what it is and download it. Well, this is what happened to this. We're pulling onto the on-ramp to get on I-79 South, and All Night Long by Machine Gun Kelly comes on from his phone. And I don't really listen to the lyrics that closely, but I heard it for a few seconds and I'm thinking, oh, this is a good song, I'm gonna download it. So I did. And one part of that sticks with me is this. How are we supposed to know what we dream is possible if nobody that looks like us makes it? That grammar's terrible, but you get the point. How are you supposed to know what's possible if nobody that looks like you is doing it? Seeing Jeff Sr. and Jr. do that stuff showed me that some guy from Butler could go do stuff in the real world and make a dent. A big dent. It was real. They made it real for me that could be done. And that's a big factor in why I do things the way I do them, as far as explaining and trying to teach, because not everybody has somebody like that in their life that could show them it could be done and is also willing to teach them how to do it. I was extremely fortunate that I crossed paths with those guys and they served that role for me, because I could tell you for sure this would still be my daily driver and I'd probably be in some job that I hate right now doing God knows what. All the things I learned from Junior fabrication wise when I was building that, he'd come by when I was doing it. He didn't do any welding or anything on there, but if I was stuck or I had a question how to go about something, he would stop by on his way from work, look at it and say, oh, you know, put this bracket here, don't put it there, use this thickness, if you use it too thin it'll break there over this, and stuff like that. He'd just kind of advise me if I hit a roadblock or just wasn't sure on something, which is why that thing works so well. I'm just put that out there. That was the first turbo kit I ever did, but I was using knowledge that was accrued by those guys through him, through his dad, that took them, 20 years to learn. I was just the hands that did it. I had the knowledge of 20 years of experience at my disposal, the determination of a 22-year-old to sit there and figure it out until it was done. That's why I do that, because the lessons I learned from Junior were, most of them probably taught to him by his dad. So I went from his dad to Junior to me. Who does that go to? It's not my call to let that information stop with me. It's just a baton. I have to pass it. Somebody has to learn that next. Somebody has to do something with it. That's my duty with this stuff that I've learned. And I feel like I've learned it and I have these opportunities that other people don't have, because I'm gonna be the guy to put it back out there, not to just one person, but thousands or hundreds of thousands, however many end up picking up the things that I say over the years. And that's why I do it. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be doing this right now. Honestly, I could sit here and pace around the shop for hours explaining all the critical stories of the role that both Senior and Junior, their whole family, played in my process over the last few years. And at some point I'll address more of them when they come up with other significant moments, but this video is about that, the main gist of it, with basically learning how to fabricate stuff, which has opened so many doors for me. Like I would never have stayed in Oklahoma if I didn't know how to do that. I stayed there to build a turbo kit on Chase's car. If I didn't have that skill, I don't have that opportunity. When you learn skills, people can't take that from you. That's in your pocket forever. No one can say, you know what, you're not allowed to know how to weld anymore. I got that. No matter where I go, that's in my pocket. I can pick up a welder and do something with it. You don't need a piece of paper that tells you you're allowed to build a turbo kit. There's so much stuff on YouTube. And just while we're on that topic, that welding tips and tricks guy, I learned a lot by watching his videos too, because I didn't want to bother Jeff with all my stupid questions when I could find that basic information on the internet myself. And that's something you should take note of too, is that when people are willing to help you, don't bother them with super basic questions all the time. See if you can find it out on your own first. It's respectful of their time and ultimately makes you more resourceful when you can dig up the information you need on your own. It shows it, you learn how to do it after a while. It's all out there. But if there's a specific thing that I couldn't find on the internet, then I would ask him, because I always felt like I was bothering him. I probably wasn't, but that was just my perspective, is that I want to minimize the amount of dumb questions I ask, or not dumb questions, but simple questions, because if I ask him too many basic questions that I could figure out myself, eventually he might get annoyed and not want to answer me anymore. That was my thought process. Interpret that how you will. Try to find stuff out yourself before you bother people with simple questions. Yeah, this kind of talk was all over the map. I'll continue it at a later date, I guess. There's a lot of stuff in here that you could ask questions on, so let me know what you have questions on. Leave a comment. Let me know what this made you think about. If it made you think about something differently, I want to know about it. That's why I put this out there, to make you think about what you're doing and yourself and what you can do. Most people have way more resources at hand than they even know about. Learning to identify resources is a skill in itself, and only one that can be built through repetition, just like anything else. So start trying. There's always a path out of whatever box you think you're in.